Hello, my name is Laura. I'll be your moderator for this first segment of the food conference. Because food touches everyone, it's important to understand the impacts of climate change on the system and other challenges as well, to recognize the importance of accelerating our response, both to climate mitigation and the adoption of new practices. To truly understand the relevance of these points, let's start with an important statistic. By 2050, the United Nations estimates that the world's population will reach almost 10 billion people. This means the global agriculture sector will need to increase production by 70% over the next 27 years. Under normal circumstances, this would be a daunting challenge, but climate impacts will add challenges such as higher temperatures, extreme weather, drought, increasing levels of carbon dioxide and sea level rise, all of which threaten to decrease the quantity and quality of food production. Climate change can also introduce new plant diseases and pests, which can destroy crops that haven't yet had time to evolve defenses against them. It can foster new parasites and diseases that target livestock, which farmers treat by using more chemicals, which then enter the food chain. The most vulnerable, children, pregnant women, the elderly, low-income communities, and those with weakened immune systems or chronic medical conditions, will be most susceptible to the changes in food access, safety, and nutrition. On the positive side, research and collaborations to accelerate global response for a world with growing populations, climate-impacted food systems, and diminishing arable land are growing. New practices are also increasing for both climate mitigation and to curb the major volume of food waste that prevails in developed countries. We live in a developed country. If you watch the orientation event, you may recall economist Pierre Espen Stoknes's presentation, where he spoke of 5 waves of innovation that began in the 1700s and how they led to the extraordinary waste of resources today. This point is most relative to you, our young generations, as you will be the ones who can, over the decades ahead, change the culture and practices that produce so much waste. The volume of waste in the food supply may surprise you. Each year, 120 billion pounds of food is wasted in the U.S. This waste equates to a loss of 130 billion meals and an estimated $408 billion in food thrown away. The scope of these statistics has drawn creative people to ways to solve this problem. Here's one example. During his freshman year at the University of Maryland, Ben Simon was struck by how much food was thrown away in the college cafeteria. 4 years later, after an investment in research and creative thinking, he co-founded Imperfect Foods, a subscription-based home delivery service for discounted ugly fruits and vegetables that are perfectly good to eat, but otherwise rejected from the food supply chain for their looks. Today, their menu of products has expanded its offerings beyond fruits and vegetables. While Ben built a for-profit business to address food waste, we will hear from Julia Lennon, education coordinator for We Don't Waste, a Denver-based nonprofit, on how the organization is meeting this challenge. She will both highlight the volume of food rescued and the sites where they rescue it, as well as the scope of the need they serve. When you listen to Julia, keep in mind that We Don't Waste is an example of community organizations doing similar work across the country.
My name is Julia Lennon. I'm the Programs and Education Manager at We Don't Waste. We Don't Waste is a nonprofit in Denver, Colorado. Our vision is that food goes to people and not landfills, and it's accessible to all. And today I'll be talking about food waste, food insecurity, the environmental impact, and what we can all do to make a difference. We Don't Waste mission is to increase food access and protect the planet by rescuing and repurposing food while educating and advocating to decrease food waste and food insecurity. And these are some photos of some colorful fruits and vegetables that we've recovered over the years. They look pretty perfect to me, but due to small imperfections, looks like one of those tomatoes maybe has a speck of mold. That whole pallet or tray of tomatoes might get rejected from a grocery store just because of one imperfection. And so at We Don't Waste, we recover food like this that's still safe to eat, but was not going to get sold, and we redistribute that food to people that can eat it. We educate students of all ages by going into schools. We also educate adult groups as well about food waste and food insecurity and what we can all do to make the planet a better place. For a bit of background about We Don't Waste, we were founded in 2009. So we've been around for 14 years now. And we started with just one man and his car, and we've grown a lot since then. We now have over 20 people on our staff, and we have 4 refrigerated trucks that help us recover and redistribute food 5 days a week. 8 a.m. to 4 p.m., our operations team is out on the road, driving our trucks around, picking up food, and then bringing it to its final destination. In 2022, we recovered about 22 million servings of food, which we equate to about 7.3 million meals. We recently started using an app where volunteers can go and pick up smaller quantities of food. For example, they might go to a local bakery and pick up 100 cupcakes in their car and then bring it directly to a food pantry, just so we're not using all the fuel and emissions that come with using one of our larger trucks to pick up small quantities of food. We recover food from over 300 different food donors. So last year it was 327 different donors, anywhere from farms to manufacturers, trucking companies, bakeries, catering companies, restaurants, grocery store warehouses. Anywhere where there's food that's still safe to eat, that they have surplus, we're happy to go and pick that up. And then we brought the food last year to over 100 nonprofit partners. The majority of them are nonprofits, but some are school pantries, about 109 nonprofits that we serve with this product that would have otherwise gone to waste for usually really silly reasons. I'm personally really passionate about this as an environmentalist. When I first started learning about food waste, I was shocked at how much food was wasted. When I learned about the environmental impact of food waste, I became really passionate about it. When I first moved out to Denver, I Googled food waste Denver, and We Don't Waste popped up. I started volunteering, and we have some photos of some volunteers in the pictures here. We really rely on our volunteer force to help us run a lot of our programs. Up in that top center picture, you can see some staff members moving pallets of food around on a truck. So when I first started, I was on the trucks and also helping to manage the volunteers. And now I get to manage our education program and talk with people like you. In the top left corner there, you can see our smallest truck filled with food after a home Broncos game. We recover food after every home game, and usually we get about 2,000 servings of prepared food that was made for the fans, and they just had leftovers. We pick up from all the major event venues and sporting venues around Denver. In the bottom left corner, you can see a photo of our walk-in cooler. We have a massive refrigerator where we can store things like milk, which that day we had tons and tons of small school-sized cartons of milk. And those were all donated from a local school district because the schools were going on a break and they had all this milk that was going to get to that Best By date before the students were back and could consume it. We'll talk a little bit about use by, best by, sell by dates as well, because that is a major reason why a lot of food is thrown away when it's still good to eat. A lot of our partners know that those dates are more about peak quality and freshness as opposed to safety. And usually milk and yogurt are good for a couple weeks, if not longer after that date. A major reason we exist is because a lot of people are facing food insecurity. In Colorado, in particular, where we're located, 1 in 3 Coloradans struggle with not having enough food to eat. And someone that's struggling with food insecurity might have to cut down on meals, the number of meals they eat a day. The quality of the food might also decrease if they don't have the resources to get the food that they need. At We Don't Waste, we believe that food is a human right and that we all should have access to nutritious foods. And we try to support our community by providing food at no cost whenever possible. We get tons and tons of veggies, usually because they're imperfect or ugly, but we don't waste any sort of food. So we get lots of shelf-stable products, baked goods, dairy, protein, also beverages. The last few years, we've partnered with Pepsi, and they've been a donor of some sodas and drinks. Really, any sort of food or beverage that is going to go to waste, we're happy to recover and distribute. Here are a few more pictures of some fruits and veggies, some turkeys. We get a lot of holiday-specific foods after that holiday has passed. So turkeys after Thanksgiving, or pumpkins and candy after Halloween. Things that are still safe to consume, but no longer marketable. Food waste starts at the farm level. So sometimes whole fields of food will be left unharvested due to low market prices. Other times there'll be sorting that happens after harvest where things are sorted out because they don't meet certain standards. We do see a lot of rejected shipments. Sometimes a whole truckload of food will show up at its final destination and will be rejected due to it looking imperfect. Maybe the temperature in the truck was a little bit off. Even if it's still safe, if there's any sort of uncertainty or imperfection, it could get rejected. We've seen a whole truckload of peppers get rejected because they were a little bit dirty. They had a little bit of dust or dirt. I'm hyper aware of food waste, and I still end up wasting food once in a while. Sometimes we just don't plan very well, or we don't store things properly and then they go bad. At that grocery store level, overstocking shelves or stacking fruit really high could lead to the produce on the bottom of the stack getting a little bit squished or dented and bruised and then looking ugly and not getting purchased. The majority of food waste actually happens at the household level. So that yellow section there is all of us in our homes or in our apartments wasting food. Restaurants, grocery stores, farms are also really large players here. This is the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency's food recovery hierarchy. And you can see at the bottom there is the landfill. So that's telling us that the last place we want to send food waste is the landfill. And unfortunately, right now, when we throw food in the trash, that is where it's headed. When food goes to the landfill, it is buried under other materials and it doesn't have the oxygen that it needs to properly decompose. And it ends up emitting a lot of methane. And methane is a harmful greenhouse gas that can be anywhere from 20 to 84 times more potent than carbon dioxide. Methane is just really good at trapping heat. Sending food to the landfill releases that methane gas and accelerates climate change. If we go to the top of the hierarchy here, you can see that source reduction, or reducing the amount of surplus food generated, is most preferred. And then feeding people. So that's really where We Don't Waste comes in, is feeding people with that food. Then feeding animals. So if you have dogs at home or chickens, feeding food scraps to animals is a great way to keep that food out of the landfill. And then industrial uses, composting is definitely better than sending food to the landfill, but obviously eating that food would be preferred. But when you compost, all the nutrients from those foods get turned into a nutrient-rich soil that can be used to grow more food. So composting is a great alternative to the landfill. 40% of food that's made for human consumption is wasted, so nearly half. And when we're wasting all that food, we're wasting all the energy and resources that went into getting that food from the farm to our fork. America spends up to $408 billion every year on wasted food. And we're also wasting 21% of our fresh water on this food that we create and then throw away. Generally, animal agriculture requires more water than a plant-based diet would. If food loss and waste were its own country, it would be the third largest emitter of greenhouse gases after China and the United States. I pulled this from a World Resource Report that was released in 2015. It's still a huge environmental problem. And the decomposition of uneaten foods accounts for 23% of our country's total methane emissions. And then I have that lettuce there just to show that a head of lettuce can take up to 25 years to decompose in a landfill. So it just slowly rots and decomposes and emits methane while being trapped in a landfill. I have this here just to show that livestock also creates a lot of methane as well. And then I have some tips and tricks and things we can all be thinking about at home. So something as simple as making a grocery list is one way to reduce your waste. So consciously planning and deciding what you're going to eat for breakfast, lunch, and dinner that week before you go to the grocery store is a great way to only buy what you need. I'm not always the best at this, but meal prepping is also huge and really helpful when reducing your waste at home. I definitely know the weeks that I do meal prep, that I spend an evening making a couple different meals for myself for the week, I definitely waste a lot less food because I have everything ready to go and nothing is going bad in my fridge because everything is already cooked and ready to eat. Another thing that I try to do is mark your dates on leftovers. Something that I'm better at is putting the food that you need to eat first in a designated part of your fridge. So if you have leftovers and you know you need to eat those before you eat anything else, put them right on like the top shelf in the middle. So when you open the fridge, it's right in your eye line and you see it and you eat that first. Or even putting an eat that first sticker or a post-it note on something as a reminder to eat your leftovers. When I freeze food, I'll often forget what I froze. So maybe I'll make a whole batch of chili and then I'll eat some of it during the week and then I'll freeze a bunch to eat in a few months. And I might not know what that mysterious container of red frozen liquid is. So even just using an expo marker to write on the Tupperware when you froze it and what it is a great way to remember to eat those leftovers and not forget about them in the freezer. Hopefully you learned something about food waste and what we can all do to make a difference. Thank you so much.
As young Americans, I think you can applaud the commitment of Julia to the many layers of social good that results from her work, as well as the solution of Ben, who saw a challenge and created a successful business to address it. As we move forward through the conference series, you will see many opportunities to be contributors of solutions to the challenging waste across society. As the transformational generations, the world is waiting for your creativity. With that in mind, let's look at a companion area of waste that is wide open for innovation. The EPA estimates that food packaging waste adds more than 30% to total U.S. waste annually. Here's a picture of just a single landfill site that affirms the validity of this statement. Since packaging is important to the protection of food products, research on new materials and early testing of them is a big focus of emerging innovations. Here are a few highlights on new packaging solutions. Plantable seed packaging is becoming popular as a zero-waste solution to single-use plastic. Fully biodegradable seed paper is created using recycled paper and wild seeds. So when the packaging reaches the end of its life cycle, it can be planted to grow new life. Did you know that up to 1 million tons of fishing nets enter our oceans each year? With so many at their disposal, one manufacturer is experimenting with recycled fishing nets for its dishwasher detergent bottles. Seaweed has also been hailed as a sustainable solution for single-use packaging. One company is creating packaging using seaweed as a natural ingredient, which also is 100% biodegradable. Corn plastic sourced from fermented plant starch is another biodegradable packaging material which can be used as an alternative to plastic packaging. It is both 100% recyclable and compostable, with chemical-free raw material processing and significant energy and water saving in its manufacturing operations. These are just a few emerging examples of emerging innovations seeking to reduce the impact of packaging on the environment. Our next speaker, Saloni Doshi, owner of EcoEnclose, highlights the need for eco-friendly packaging and industry steps on the journey forward.
First and most important thing is that today, the majority of packaging that is out there is first, it requires a lot of extraction of natural resources, so trees, fossil fuels, minerals to make virgin packaging. It tends to be manufactured overseas where it can be done incredibly cheaply with very little attention to labor issues and transportation efficiency, and then it's thrown away where it's sort of landfilled or becomes litter. And so packaging actually represents somewhere between 5 to 15% of a food product's carbon footprint. So according to the Climate Collaborative, packaging accounts for about 5% of the energy used in the life cycle of the product. And Annie's, the popular CPG company, did a study and found that it actually accounts for 11% of their specific carbon footprint. So it's a pretty significant part of a brand footprint and something that they can fairly easily actually minimize. And then finally, I think a lot of people recognize that packaging results in a lot of waste. If you think about your garbage, almost 50% of that garbage is actually packaging waste. Most of it ends up landfilled. Some of it is recycled and a small portion is composted, but most of it does end up in landfills. And landfills have a lot of issues. One of the biggest issues with the landfill is that the resources that go into a landfill are basically wasted. They're very valuable resources that could be used for something else, but they just get wasted after being used largely just one time. Additionally, landfills are one of the largest emitters of methane in the world. So as that stuff sort of degrades slowly, it releases a very toxic greenhouse gas. That is one of the leading reasons why climate change is happening. And then finally, all of the wasted material that goes into landfill is a massive lost economic opportunity. So there's a lot of reasons why packaging is terrible and something that any company looking to make a difference and run their business well wants to figure out and do better. So what is sustainable packaging? I'll say that there's a lot of different ways companies describe it. One of the things that EcoEnclose does when we work with brands is we say, like, it's not enough just to slap a green label on your package and call it a day. You don't want to just get by saying, oh, this is recyclable or this has a little bit of recycled content and think that you sort of pat yourself on the back that you did it. We really work with companies to develop what we call sustainable packaging frameworks so that they can make really good decisions that ladder up to something really impactful for the planet. So what I'm going to do over the next couple slides is share with you EcoEnclose's sustainable packaging framework. That doesn't necessarily mean it has to be yours, but hopefully it's a really good starting point. So for us, our vision is that it's really a vision of circularity. So our vision is that all packaging is ideally made out of packaging and then can become packaging again. And that in the times where virgin, non-recycled inputs are needed, that they are inputs that are produced in net positive ways for the planet. So for us, that's true circularity. There are other examples of frameworks out there. Amazon is a company that is really focused on just making sure all packaging is curbside recyclable. There's a lot of brands out there that are saying, hey, my vision is just to be plastic free. We personally think that some of those visions are a little more surface level and don't go as deep and wade through the complexities as they should. But those are also examples of frameworks. I'm going to talk more about all of the different parts of this framework and why we think this sort of commitment to circularity is one that may work for a lot of brands out there. So for us, like, what does it take to achieve a vision of true circularity? So I'm going to talk through those here. And I'm going to talk to them at a high level on this slide. And then in the subsequent slides, I'll really talk through what each of these mean in more detail. So packaging has a couple components. First is, what are the inputs that go into packaging? Second is, what are the sort of logistics of transporting them, storing them, et cetera. And then the end of life. So when the package is done, what gets done with it? So I'm going to talk through what is important to us in each of those three buckets in order to achieve and build towards a vision of circularity where all packaging is made out of packaging. So in the production and manufacturing of inputs, for us, maximizing recycled content is key. When virgin inputs are needed, looking for regenerative, renewable materials, and then using life cycle analyses when optimal solutions and debating between materials is unclear. Then in the logistics component, first is protecting products. You want to make sure your products are actually usable when they get to the end consumer. Then minimizing the carbon footprint of transportation and storage. And then in the end of life, you want to prioritize reuse when it is feasible and ecologically superior, and then maximize recyclability, and in certain cases, consider compostability. So this slide is a summary, but I'm going to delve into the details in subsequent slides. So the two things that ultimately are the most important part of our framework is maximizing recycled content, which was in this first bucket right here, and then maximizing recyclability. I'm going to talk through them together because there is a really important interplay between them. So they're important to talk through side by side. So why is this so important? Why is maximizing recycled content and maximizing recyclability alongside each other so important? I like to start by just explaining what the recycling process looks like. And so how does recycling work? You put things in your blue bin, or you might drop off thin film at a grocery store. That material gets collected. It gets sorted and separated into bales of like materials. So if you have a blue bin that has aluminum cans and HDPE milk jugs and paper, all of that gets put into one place. And then a MRF, which is a material recycling facility, will take it and sort it through all of this like massive conveyors of machinery and people, and they're sorting that equipment. And at the end, you get these big bales of, you get a big bale, a couple big bales of aluminum cans, you get big bales of cardboard, bales of mixed paper, bales of milk jugs, bales of soda bottles, things like that. And then those materials get sold to reclaimers. Those reclaimers will melt or pelletize or repulp that material and remanufacture it back into raw materials that can be converted into new packaging. That packaging is sold to brands and reused. And hopefully, if things are done well, that cycle sort of maintains over and over again. And so if you think about the recycling chain that I just described, it is really important for anybody that wants to be focused on circularity. And again, a circularity is the idea that packaging can be made out of packaging. If you're focused on that, then you really want to make sure there's a strong recycling infrastructure such that as many materials can be recycled as possible and actually do get recycled back into something else. So for a brand, if you want to design for recyclability, which means that it's actually recycled and put in a blue bin or in a single source separated end of life stream at the end of its life, and you want to be buying recycled content in your packaging, which is that pull that allows for the demand to be created. And if you're maximizing recycled content, you're creating that demand for recycled material, which is, if you look at the slide before, that demand is what's incentivizing the folks to be able to invest in sorting and separating equipment. It's actually paying for the brokering and selling and remanufacturing. So you're creating that demand that makes the recycling infrastructure work and actually drives investment into a better and better recycling infrastructure. So in this sort of long-term world where all packaging is made out of packaging, a commitment to designing for recyclability and maximizing recycled content, hand in hand, help to slowly create the investments that are going to build towards that vision of circularity long-term. So this is sort of a pillar of our framework. Other reasons why we really focus on recycled content are that it does drive a lot of other social and environmental benefits. It reduces the need for natural resources. So every time you use recycled paper, you're protecting trees. Every time you use recycled plastic, you're minimizing the need for fossil fuels to be extracted, et cetera. It also is significantly more carbon efficient. So a recycled aluminum can is 90% more carbon efficient than a virgin aluminum can. For glass, it's about 40% more efficient. For plastic, it can be 30 to 70% more efficient. So it's much better for your carbon footprint as well. And then finally, it leads to the creation of very high-paying domestic green jobs. A lot of people ask me about compostability. It's one of the first questions we actually get. So from an end of life, as you know, I really talked more about recyclability as being really important and also reusability being an option when it makes sense. So compostability is a really interesting issue. As I said at the beginning, I've worked in food waste or food systems for a long time before I ran EcoEnclose, and I'm an avid and passionate. And I think I really always like to start by saying composting is really best for organic waste. Composting exists as the optimal end of life for organic waste. So food waste, ag waste, yard waste, all of that by going into compost instead of going into a landfill where it can create methane. By going to a compost, it decomposes and creates a rich humus that can make soils healthier and replenish and sequester carbon into soils. Compostable packaging is very different. First of all, compostable packaging, even if it's certified by BPI, oftentimes doesn't decompose in real life situations. It also degrades the quality of compost. It makes compost like a lot wetter. And most compostable packaging today is made from these like highly ag industrial crops. So what we always say about compostability is that if you happen to be packaging something in such that the food packaging is going to carry a lot of excessive residue, like a peanut butter, that isn't going to be able to be washed out with any real ease, that might be a really good situation for compostable packaging because the packaging will help that food waste to get into the compost bin instead of the landfill. But in any other situation, all packaging and environmental experts will say design for recyclability before you should design for compostability from an environmental hierarchy perspective. So quickly, I'm going to just talk through a couple slides of just potential real-life solutions that may be interesting. So if you're thinking about paper packaging, examples of paper packaging that you might consider would be CCNB or tan bending chips are two examples of packaging that can be made with 100% recycled content. It's naturally recyclable and naturally biodegradable. We would always recommend avoiding SBS, which is solid bleach sulfite, because of the amount of bleach and the minimal amounts of recycled content in it. If you're looking at glass or aluminum, again, maximize recycled content. Thankfully, they're generally both curbside recyclable, though it's important to recognize that the recycling of glass can be really challenging in our country. Minimize the use of paper and plastic labels because that can get in the way of recyclability. And as much as possible, design for and encourage reuse, especially if you opt for glass packaging. And then finally, a lot of folks use these sort of multi-layered pouches that you see. Typically, pouches are made with like a combination of sort of plastics and foils that get all like laminated together, making these materials unrecyclable and always made with virgin materials. A couple of new innovations to potentially consider. One would be an FSC certified curbside recyclable paper. Another would be a thin film recyclable monomaterial plastic. So one that could go into a store drop-off bin. And another would be a non-recyclable plastic bag, but that has a high level of post-consumer waste. So these different pouch blends have different barrier properties, so work for different types of food, but each of them is a step forward in the world of flexible film packaging. So across these two slides, hopefully you've seen if there's specific material that you've been considering, here are some different versions of that material that could help push sustainability and circularity forward. So just a brief overview on circularity and packaging and food, and hopefully helps folks sort of on their way.
Now that you've had an introduction to two major areas of waste, let's explore another aspect of the food system facing significant challenges today: agriculture. For there's no way to significantly increase food production without healing the soil. Soil health is the foundation of a healthy farm ecosystem. For as long as people have been farming, natural organic methods were the norm. But during the last century, the rise of chemical-based agriculture has dramatically changed the way we produce our food. Increasingly corporate and industrialized, today's conventional farms are saturated with artificial fertilizers, pesticides, and herbicides that are engineered to reduce the burden of labor while keeping crop yields high, causing a cascade of problems and significant contributions to climate change. These conditions are driving new practices such as sustainable and regenerative agriculture, which seeks to improve soil health by sequestering carbon, storing water, and building healthier farm ecosystems. Marin County, California, one of the most civic-minded counties in the state, is a microcosm of national and international activities to regenerate soil. One of the largest levers we have to address current atmospheric carbon and mitigate ongoing emissions while we begin the journey to alter traditional industrial activities is to help nature pull carbon out of the atmosphere and store it in the ground. The primary way to do this is soil carbon sequestration. Not only is it good for the climate, but it's particularly good for soil health. Metha Klock, Director of Stewardship at the Marin Agricultural Land Trust, will share more with you on this work.
Thank you, everybody, so much for inviting me to present at the Civic Imagination Challenge. My name is Dr. Metha Klock, and I'm the Director of Stewardship at the Marin Agricultural Land Trust. Today, I'm going to be talking about the Marin Agricultural Land Trust, carbon farm planning, and how this contributes to climate resilience. So I wanted to start off just by giving a roadmap of today's talk. I'm going to start off by talking about the Marin Agricultural Land Trust, give an overview of the work we do and how we contribute to land conservation. Then I'm going to be talking more about carbon farm planning, give some history behind what carbon farm planning is, how it developed, a little bit behind the science of carbon farm planning, and then talk about how Myint has applied carbon farm planning. The Marin Agricultural Land Trust, which we call Myint, I'll be referring to it as Myint throughout the talk. Myint started in 1980 and was a response to threats from development of land in West Marin. Different individuals came together to protect this land for agriculture. Today, we currently have 93 conservation easements on agricultural lands. And the map on this slide can show where those agricultural land easements are. If you look at the kind of olive green color, this is land or farmland that's been protected by Myint. There's National Park Service lands, and that's in the lighter green color. And then farmland that has not yet been protected and is currently at risk is in the brown color. Currently, we have over 55,000 acres of protected land with Myint easements. This is an area that's twice the size of San Francisco and also about 10% of Marin County. So we really have an opportunity with this land to both protect it for agriculture, but also to protect it for biodiversity, for water, for soil health, for things like improving climate resilience in general. And Myint uses federal, state, as well as local funding sources, in addition to private donations to help support the easement acquisition efforts that we have. As I mentioned before, we have our easement acquisitions, which is really the first step in our conservation program. We're in active process of getting new easements all the time. From 2019 to 2022, we developed something called the Drought Resistance and Water Security Program. And this was able to address issues that landowners were having in a very immediate way to help preserve their operations and provide water sources to their cattle on their lands. We recently developed a small grants program, which is addressing forward-thinking and innovative operation practices on these agricultural lands, thinking about ways that we can work to help farmers and ranchers sequester carbon and think about, again, improving that climate resilience on this land that's in West Marin. Myint has a staff of just over 20 people, so we're a relatively small organization, and we really rely on and work together with our partners to help preserve the land and protect it in different ways. Some of our partners are the Marin Resource Conservation District, the National Resource Conservation Service, University of California Cooperative Extension, and Point Blue. We couldn't accomplish all the work that we do at Myint in protecting and preserving and stewarding these natural and agricultural areas without the help from these other organizations. Let's get more into carbon farm planning and how Myint has worked to be involved in the carbon farming process. So what is a carbon farm plan? A carbon farm plan is a conservation plan that outlines the carbon farming opportunities on a particular agricultural property and accounts for the needs of both the agricultural operation as well as the local ecology. When we're helping to develop carbon farm plans, we're not just thinking about it solely from an agricultural perspective or solely from an ecological perspective. We're really thinking about how agriculture and ecology can work together to help preserve and make the land more resilient. This slide is just looking at kind of a general easement. And you can see in yellow, this would outline the boundaries of the easement property. And zeroing in more, you can see different elements of it that are proposed for increasing carbon sequestration or making that land more resilient from a carbon perspective. Some of these things could be increasing wetland restoration. And in the blue dots on this slide, that's proposed areas where you might want to improve wetlands. Increasing tree and shrub plantings in sort of orange areas, applying compost, increasing critical area plantings, improving riparian plantings, thinking about things like forage and biomass plantings. In the orange areas, kind of in the left side of the slide, thinking about improving or increasing windbreaks and shelter belts, and also hedgerow plantings. So these are things all kind of from an ecological side of things that could be implemented on a farm or ranch that would also help improve the agricultural operation and increase the carbon sequestration on those ranches. Some other things that can be done are things like, from a more operation perspective, purchasing an anaerobic digester, developing a composting facility, developing new prescribed grazing plans, or combustion system improvements. So all of these different elements are taken into account when developing a carbon farm plan. A little bit of history behind carbon farm planning. The Marin Carbon Farm Project was founded in 2007. And then about 5 years after that, the first results were published. Then in 2014, the Marin Carbon Project completed the world's first formal carbon farms plan. And this enabled the quantification of greenhouse gas benefits of carbon farming practices. In 2015, the Marin Carbon Project developed an implementation task force, and this brought together several different partners with different levels of expertise. In 2019, there were 20 marine carbon farm plans that were developed, and this led to the potential to sequester 188,000 metric tons of carbon dioxide by 2020. Carbon farm planning has really developed over the last 16 years. We can capture carbon as plant biomass as well as soil carbon. And when we think about soil in particular, this is really primary and fundamental for agricultural as well as natural processes. In the image on this slide, you can see carbon up at the top of this arch. And it really serves as what we term the keystone that holds all soil, physical, chemical, biological processes and properties together. Without that carbon keystone, all of the other elements within the soil would kind of fall apart. And so when we're thinking about sequestering carbon and carbon farming practices, we can really use carbon as a keystone to benefit other aspects of farming and other aspects of natural areas as well. Carbon farm planning begins with an inventory of natural resources conditions on a farm or ranch, and then identifies opportunities for reductions in greenhouse gas emissions, as well as enhancing carbon capture and storage by plants and soils. There are three main ways that carbon farm planning can really help protect and improve, and as well as restore landscapes. When we think about protecting from loss, we think about things like how can we, from the most basic level, protect land? And so this means protecting forests, protecting intact wetlands, protecting grasslands. And Myint does this through our easement process. And then just to hone in a little bit more on how carbon farm planning can help reduce carbon emissions, if we look at this graph here from Fargione et al. In 2018, we can see that agriculture and grassland can really, if we think about managing them in a really beneficial way, can help to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions in very significant ways. So on the x-axis of this graph, we see climate mitigation potential in 2025. And on the y-axis, we see different management efforts that can be done and the amount of carbon dioxide emissions that we could decrease if we were to employ these more regularly. So things like avoiding grassland conversion, planting cover crops, adding biochar to lands, alley cropping, cropland nutrient management. One of the things that Myint does is, and what has been done on malted lands, is adding compost to the soil. So the benefit of adding compost is that it can build soil carbon, increase soil fertility, improve soil moisture, and also increase the growth of plants. And remember, plants are sequestering that carbon, and as they decompose, adding that carbon back to the soil. That's a really important element to improving or increasing carbon sequestration. Another thing that results from carbon farm plans is protecting forested hillsides. A lot of these forested hillsides really aren't appropriate for agriculture, so we can focus more on how we can kind of improve them, how we can plant more plants to reduce soil erosion, increase soil carbon, again, improve soil moisture, and improve stream flows. Rotational grazing is another element that Myint supports on climate-friendly farms. So this means basically adding interior fencing within farms to allow or to alleviate stress on particular areas so that they're not overgrazed. So if there's more fencing in areas, that means that farmers and ranchers can move their cattle around more effectively, take that stress off of one particular area, and allow those areas that are not being grazed to regenerate, to sequester carbon, to grow more biomass and plants, to improve that soil health. Another thing that's frequently done is plantings along stream corridors and stock ponds. So again, this can help to reduce soil erosion, build soil carbon, and dramatically increase biological diversity. And finally, enhancing grasslands. This can both come through enhancing soil health as well as doing those plantings for forage or native biodiversity, or kind of combining this together to really benefit both native biodiversity as well as the forage that's needed to support agricultural operations. I wanted to note with this slide that this long list of things that can be employed to really improve climate resilience of different farms and ranches, there are still more things that can be done as well. And we're continuing to learn and think about ways to implement and to suggest really beneficial plans for farmers and ranchers to help to improve their climate resilience. How can we also increase agricultural production value? Since Myint is working to keep land in agriculture in perpetuity, how can we do that in a way that benefits both the ecological side of things as well as the agricultural production value, so that these things are working together collaboratively to benefit each other? I've talked a lot today about what we can do from a farming and ranching perspective, but there are also things that we as individuals can do as well. In your own yard, you can do things like planting drought-tolerant species, increasing biodiversity, thinking about mulching and cover crops, again, finding ways to add carbon back to the soil, encouraging water infiltration so that water isn't running off into our waterways that might have contaminants in it, and then not tilling our soil, and again, just working to build soil health on our own scale can have larger scale impacts than we realize. Things within our own homes we can do, reducing electricity consumption is one thing, reducing gas vehicle miles, and then also thinking about how we can buy more local foods. the more connected we can become with the land and with the food that we eat. And that generally just makes us more aware of the inputs that go into creating the things that we rely on for our own survival. So thinking about this comprehensively about what we can do, if enough people are doing it, we can really have an impact on benefiting our planet. So that wraps up my talk today. And again, thank you to the Civic Imagination Challenge for inviting me to share the work that Malta is doing with carbon farm planning today. So thank you so much.
Anthony Myint, founder of Zero Foodprint, is another resident of Marin County and a carbon farming advocate. He is approaching the challenge from a different but equally dedicated approach. His unanticipated journey began from a pop-up restaurant and grew into a nonprofit that works to fund and share carbon farming practices across the Marin County farm system.
Hello, everybody. My name is Anthony Myint. I'm the co-founder and executive director of Zero Foodprint. Zero Foodprint is a nonprofit that is leading public-private collaborations with state agencies in California and Colorado, as well as local governments and businesses, and finding ways to generate funds and then team up with farms and ranches to scale regenerative agriculture. Our approach differs from a lot of other nonprofits because we are very directly implementing the next practice and getting that onto the next acre. I'm going to start today with a little bit of an origin story. I inadvertently kicked off the pop-up movement through something called Mission Street Food. We started running pop-up restaurants inside of a hole-in-the-wall Chinese restaurant. Journalists named it a pop-up. We started working with guest chefs to do half the menu. We did the other half of the menu. 140 events later, it turned into a permanent pop-up called Mission Chinese Food. Mission Chinese won Restaurant of the Year in the New York Times in 2012. Around that time, my wife and I also had a daughter, and so I started to think a lot about food and climate. We started the nonprofit Zero Foodprint, and at the beginning, it was helping chefs and restaurants go carbon neutral. We came to learn that the embodied emissions of the ingredients served at the restaurants, that the food itself was the source of all the emissions. Something I didn't know at the start of that process, which is that society needs a way to change how food is grown. From there, we started to learn about regenerative agriculture. You can see in the top right the photo of a ranch, Stemple Creek, fourth generation rancher Lauren Poncha. And Stemple Creek is doing something that is now called regenerative grazing or holistic grazing. Basically, it means rotating the cattle from one paddock to another in a way that optimizes interaction with the ecosystem and starts to take carbon out of the atmosphere, turn it into healthy soil. In addition to the regenerative grazing, Stemple Creek was applying compost to the field as part of a study from UC Berkeley's biogeochemistry department. This was on the cover of the 2018 New York Times Sunday magazine. The headline said, "Can dirt save Earth?" ? Scientists have confirmed it probably should have been "Soil can save Earth!" Because the amount of carbon that soil can take out of the atmosphere and transform into the living and eventually dead microbiology in the soil is immense. In 2019, we closed the restaurant and began collaborations with the California Department of Food and Ag, and then most recently with the Colorado Department of Ag. Our focus, instead of farm to table, is on almost like table to farm, getting the next regenerative practice onto the next acre. Just to drive that point home, you can see here a side-by-side of 2 acres of soil loosely represented. As the agricultural manager starts to implement healthy soil practices, there starts to be more living things in the soil. A lot of regenerative agriculture is really just about building up the amount of living things in the soil through the kinds of practices on the right. A lot of what Zero Foodprint does now is essentially work with businesses to generate funds for farmers to implement these kinds of practices. And so this slide kind of represents our 2 main functions. On the left is our business members. And so that ranges from Single Thread, one of the top 50 restaurants in the world, to my restaurant, Mission Chinese Food, to others. And I think one of the ones that we're the most proud of is Subway sandwiches. And so Subway is definitely not a business that you would think of as like, oh, that's they must be supporting regenerative agriculture. But in a lot of ways, that's what makes this program so unique and scalable. Subway is not buying regenerative ingredients. They're not buying, grass-fed, regeneratively grazed beef for the steak and cheese. They're not buying heirloom organic tomatoes. What they're doing is getting a couple cents from the sandwich to help a Colorado farmer apply compost, plant cover crops, basically to regenify the landscape. I should note, Subway is participating with 5 locations in Boulder, Colorado as a pilot. And I think it speaks towards the scalability, though, because corporate America in general can't really use the funds that they're collecting for social good necessarily. They're kind of almost bound by corporate law to distribute revenues to shareholders as profit. And the program that we've put in place makes it possible because it gives the customer the option to do it. Since 2020, the program has started to have considerable impact. A couple cents per purchase is coming in. We collect that, and then we have been able to get over $1 million out to farms and ranches with a huge amount of potential estimated carbon sequestration linked to those projects. It's also worth noting that the money is not necessarily going to like a regenerative farm. It could be, maybe they would be doing their 4th or 5th practice, or it could be going to a conventional farm to start kind of on that path, getting the first practice, the second practice. And so in a lot of ways, it's really meeting customers where they're at, farms where they're at, and then just taking that next step, getting the next practice onto the next acre. A lot of studies from McKinsey and Forbes and others, the majority of customers and then also employees prefer companies that are taking care of the environment. Our work is basically to give them that legitimate solution and make it local and resonant. It's like actually building healthy soil and water conservation and resilience and biodiversity and prosperity in your own community. The way this plays out in reality is simple mechanisms like these on the menu. So you can see one restaurant in Denver, they just changed their prices. The burger here used to be $20. They increased the prices 1%. So now it's $20.20. The customer might ask, what's going on here? And it's almost like an entry point for the staff to explain the great environmental impact work that they're having or that they're doing in the region. And then on the right, you can see, here's the receipt from Subway. And I think if nothing else, this hopefully conveys total scalability. Restore Colorado, 1%. And so for the customer at Subway, they first of all can opt out. So it's posted on the menu and different signs in the restaurants. And we're now about 18 months in at 5 locations. And the operator and franchisee reports literally 0 customers have opted out. Just in case, he keeps a cup with dimes in it on the counter. And so in some ways, whether society solves the climate crisis, whether the food system transforms, almost comes down to this kind of question of, can we just start sending a couple cents per purchase towards climate solutions? How the funds go out is guided by some new science and modeling. This is a modeling tool from Colorado State University called the Comet Planner. They teamed up with the USDA's Natural Resource Conservation Service to create this tool. And what it allows you to do is pick a farming practice from a drop-down list. This is a screenshot from a dairy compost project that we did. So the dairy applied a thin layer of compost to the field to kind of jumpstart the microbiology in the grassland and help sequester carbon. The model is basically providing an estimate of the amount of carbon coming out of the atmosphere and turning into healthy soil biology. In turn, each project we conduct is overseen by a local accredited third party. So it could be the resource conservation districts in California. It could be nonprofits like Point Blue Conservation. It could be the University of California Agriculture and Natural Resources Department. In other states, it might be like the Cooperative Extension. In Colorado, it would be CSU or a nonprofit like Mad Agriculture. Those third parties are out there overseeing the projects, validating it, and making sure that each project is done at the standards that link back to that model on the previous page. Our program pays for the time of the technical assistance providers, or TAPs as we call them. And then we invite farmers and ranchers and applicants to propose a specific scope of work and an associated cost or grant request. Overall, each project has a total cost between the implementation and the technical assistance. And then it has a total carbon benefit. So the amount of carbon coming out of the atmosphere times the number of years of anticipated benefit. So in this case, it's a little bit high because the tree and shrub establishment project has a long-term benefit, whether it's through the private sector or pairing with the public sector or foundations or carbon markets. We're essentially just trying to get the next dollar to go towards the next practice on the next acre. And so as society is making this transition, Zero Foodprint's here to help anybody in any community take the next step or their first step. So that's what I've got now, and I look forward to working with anybody in this group on advancing regenerative ag. Thanks.
Many farmers are also investing in regenerative and organic farming as organic food has become increasingly valued and more profitable. Regenerative farming techniques are focused on building soil health through ecosystem-centered techniques. This contrasts with the industrial model, which strips soil of nutrients and results in a negative feedback loop that requires more and more inputs like synthetic fertilizers. Sustainable farmers use many techniques to create and maintain healthy soil structure that is rich in nutrients. Techniques include crop rotation, the use of compost, cover cropping and mulching, no-till or low-till techniques, zero pesticide use. The Rodale Institute is an early leader in natural and more responsible farming. Founded by J.I. Rodale, the Institute worked for years on research into the cultivation of healthy living soil. They called their approach organic. The Institute continues to invest in research. However, with the growth and popularity of the organic food marketplace, it has now become a leader in training farmers for the practice. From this rundown 63-acre farm, a movement was born that laid the foundation for the organic produce we enjoyed today. David Pryor, Director of Marketing and Communications, and Daniel Kemper, Director of Training, will bring you up to date on Rodale's current activities and its farmer training program.
Hello, everyone. My name is David Pryor. I'm Director of Marketing and Communications at Rodale Institute, and joining me today is Dan Kemper, our Master Trainer.
Hi, everyone.
We're with Rodale Institute. We are a global nonprofit formed a little over 75 years ago that's been focused on organic agriculture, the differences between organic and conventional agriculture, the profitability possibilities with it, what kind of best practices are done. It really started back in the 1940s as conventional agriculture was taking hold across America with using of chemical fertilizers and pesticides and then GMO seeds. Our founder, J.I. Rodale, didn't seem to think that was a good idea. So he started a small research experimental farm in Emmaus, Pennsylvania, looking at what was the difference between when you add a chemical to grow a plant versus when you let it grow organically. Over time, we grew and regrew. We eventually moved to a much larger farm property outside of Kutztown, Pennsylvania. We now have almost 400 acres, which is an experimental research farm where we're having one row of corn being grown with conventional chemicals, and then next to it is an organic row of corn, and the next one is organic using a manure compost, and then the same thing replicated over again with different tilling techniques. A whole section of our farm is devoted to seeing what the soil carbon matter is, seeing what the water infiltration rates are, seeing what the yields are for each of them. Can we grow as much food with an organic system as we can with a conventional system? Spoiler alert, yes, we can. A whole other large section of our farm is devoted to teaching the next generation of farmers how to grow organically. That's where Dan comes in, and he has a cohort of students that does that every year. I'll let you take it from there, Dan.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks for the intro. I run a farmer training program. It's called the Rodale Institute Farmer Training Program, or RIF School. And we would like to see more organic farming. And so if we want more organic farming, we obviously need more organic farmers. Part of Rodale, the consulting team, handles transitioning existing farmers into organic. And my job here is to create the new farmers. We've been around for about a decade, and we've gone through a few different phases. This is a 35-week program. So we go 9 months, and that is broken into 4 quarters. Those quarters each have their own content, and it kind of matches the season along with more or less the level of understanding that the cohort has. There's a cohort that is there for 40 hours a week. We spend some time working in the field and some time in the classroom and some time on field trips. So it's kind of a 40-60 split between 60% of the time in the field, working on the farm, creating their classroom, painting the canvas, so to say, that we've set for them when they got here. We go through greenhouses, compost, all types of intro stuff that they need for the very fundamental basis of their farming knowledge. We also begin a farm plan project at that time, which is a business plan that I ask them to create, and it spans the entire season. So as we go through these different classes and different levels, they're building out their hypothetical or maybe very real farm plan for what they're going to do after they graduate the program. Second quarter, after they understand some basic farming skills, is tractor training and financing and marketing, as well as soil science. So now we're really getting into what it means to be a farmer and an organic farmer, not just with treating the earth properly, but also understanding how to run a profitable budget. We have a lot of help from partnering programs like KTC. They help us with teaching finances to the students, and we go through several weeks of that, really understanding how to run a budget. The third quarter is going to be right when they start to get a really good understanding of science and farming. And now we let them loose with our researchers. Our researchers are incredibly intelligent people, hardworking frontline researchers. So we want to make sure that when we send the students to them, that they have a basic understanding so they can have that conversation. The fourth quarter, the last quarter, is completely dedicated to owning a business and what it takes to own a business. We go through another round of financing training. We go through a lot of marketing. We talk to lawyers for legal training. We talk with ag loan officers about how to get loans and what that looks like. Then we finish with the end of the farm plan project, where they have a business plan that they can take with them from this institute, along with all the training and knowledge that we endowed over those 9 months, and go start their own program or start their own farm. The entire cohort of first year students goes through what I just described. But the whole time, there are 2 other students that are returning from the previous year. They've been hired on, so to say, for a whole nother year. They'll go through all the classes again, but they'll also be the mini managers in the field, and they'll get that experience and that training and the exposure that they're looking for to leave the institute and be able to manage their own team of employees. It's like a manager training that we have as a fellowship program. I really wanted to have the impact of creating actual farmers and business owners and profitable business owners. So we really dialed up the finance and marketing and legal part of it in the last few years, and really honed in on what is a maximum educational facility or environment or atmosphere. Instead of worrying about getting the crops in and out, we still get the crops in and out, but the real focus here is making those crops coming in and coming out the most palatable, absorbable form possible for a whole cohort of students. Now we're looking to expand this program. We have lots of people that are interested in RIFT and farmer training in their state and their region. So this has really been a big undertaking, but a successful one so far.
I think you bring up a really good point. Really, an entrepreneurial mindset is necessary to do this. And I think that students or anyone who comes into it thinking that it's really just a way to be outside, that's a little short-sighted, when there's really the ones who are successful find creative ways to create new products. I love blueberries. I'm going to grow blueberries. Well, blueberries don't work here, so then I have to adjust. Or the market's not for blueberries here. Or this restaurant just opened down the road and they're looking for more herbs, and I can do that and have a customer right down the road. It's having to be flexible, having to be smart and creative with what you do, and being thoughtful about business is the best solution for you. Working in a farmer's market on the weekend and selling directly to customers, or is it working with a service industry, working with a restaurant, or working maybe with business to business with a large supplier that will get you your goods into grocery stores. So there's a lot of creativity that comes with being a farmer. There are also hundreds and thousands of other jobs that are related in the food industry that aren't farmers. I was seeing a stat the other day that agriculture in America is a $4 trillion industry. The largest industry on the planet is agriculture, feeding us all. Robotics is becoming a much bigger thing in farming now because it's better to use robotics to be precise than chemistry. And if we can use more of that and get that more installed within farms, farmers can move away from the harmful chemicals and in being more strategic with robotics. For those students are into blockchain, there's a lot of opportunities in that in agriculture with organics in particular, making sure that the product stays organic through its cycle. It leaves an organic farm, it goes into an organic mill, it's packaged. So everything has to stay within that in order to be a certified product when it gets to a grocery store.
Completely agree.
And we're finding now that conventional agriculture is predominant. Probably 99% of the farms you see when you drive through the countryside are a conventional farm. They're using chemicals to grow the food. They're using chemicals to kill the weeds. They're using chemicals to fend off any insects or anything else that would eat at the yield. And the yield was always the number one driving force. What we're finding with organic farms and organic farmers that are understanding it is the yield's one thing, how much you can grow is certainly important, but what is more important as a business owner is the profit you make. That's where organic is really making a difference for farmers now because of the profit margins they're getting on organic food. And also because of recent foreign events such as the war in Ukraine, the cost of fertilizers and synthetic inputs is getting higher. Most of that stuff came from Russia, surprisingly.
Right, sure.
So now their costs of a conventional farmer is going up. When that happens and there's using less chemicals or ideally no chemicals at all, the soil health improves. So now having a more robust farms in case of extreme weather events, which we're seeing every day throughout the world, organic farms are more resilient. The reality is that conventional agriculture has only been in practice for about 60 some years. It came into heavy use right after World War II because we created all of these chemicals to fight a war. Then we have this chemical industry, and what can we do with it? Oh, we can kill all these other things such as plants or bugs or things like that. So can move away from all these chemicals and go back to practices that we've been doing for generations and eons that Native Americans were doing when they first started growing food on these lands. Like, look how prosperous this fertile land of America can be. And then we can grow more food out of it. And we can go back to those systems and have a more abundant and fair and equitable. It's fairer for the farmers. It's going to be better for the livestock as we use regenerative organic certified practices. It's all based off of farmer fairness and equitable wages. It's all about animal welfare and treating them fairly. And also it goes back to soil health so that we actually have that abundance. So that's what we're working towards with the Rodale Institute. We are seeing tons of growth in this. We have grown exponentially in the last 5 years. We've gone from 30 to 100 and some employees quickly, and more of that's coming. We're hiring every week. The same is going for certifiers for organic in every section of the country. They're looking for more work to go out and help farmers be certified organic. So then they get the label, so then they could get those price premiums. And then the customers trust that food that we're eating is good for us.
Organic has been compared to other things, and there's different catchwords on different labels, like all natural or sustainable or something like that. But when you really have that stamp that comes with a certification and an audit process with real rules and with standards that we can all just look up and know, that's a lot of power, because that's the support that can actually drive the mission forward. You can call your food any type of thing that you want to, but when you have a nationwide standard that everyone understands and it's going to be even across the board and people know exactly what they're getting, that's really going to be the support that they need to, again, vote with their food dollar and support something, because there's no wishy-washy room. People can take words and do what they want with it, but when you have the real word like organic and with the standard and a board behind it, there's real power, and regenerative organic is building right on top of that.
Yep, there's a lot to learn from the old, and the new is going to bring a lot of new, smarter technologies that can help us do this in healthy and sustainable ways.
Yeah, here at the farm, we do some no-till corn, roll down the roller crimper, and we have a new cultivator. It is a weed zapper, and it uses electricity to kill weeds that it touches. So we are using kind of old reduced tillage technique and then adding a brand new piece of technology to it to enhance it. So that's actually been a lot of fun. It looks like little fireworks going off when you hit the weeds.
Yeah. There's definitely growth throughout the agriculture industry. There's a lot of opportunity in this space.
We all learned a lot today about two critical aspects of the food system. At the opening of the program, we learned that to feed a global population of almost 10 billion by mid-century, we need to increase food production. To do so, we not only have to mitigate climate change, but we need to change practices that negatively impact agriculture and reduce the scope of food and packaging waste as well. Recalling Cass Sustein's nudge theory, we recommend you use the Civic Imagination app to reach out to the public with something they should know about new promise for our shared future that you learned today. You can learn more about using the app at the Imagine Forward campaign website. If you have questions about what you learned, please send them to joyce@imagineforwardcampaign.org. At the close of the 3-part conference, we will provide a newsletter summarizing all key points and include responses to your questions as well. Next week, we'll move on to Part 2, which will showcase AgTech, a rapidly growing field of science and technology-based innovation for farming. We will also review the scope of emissions from farm to fork transportation and how this issue is driving new creativity in forms of urban farming that puts food closer to customers. Looking ahead to Part 3, we will focus on new directions in plant-based foods and the evolution of alternative proteins, as well as highlight young entrepreneurs whose innovations are creating new marketplaces for the world you will live in and contribute to. We look forward to welcoming you all again next week to Part 2 of the Food Systems Conference.